Iran, just as Iran's flexing its muscles again, conducting war games in the Arabian Sea. Yesterday, a top Pentagon official fought off allegations the Obama administration is comfortable with Iran getting a nuke. Are we doing enough to control Iran? Some say yes. Our next guest says no. Joining us now from Washington is Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, also a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, great to see you.
Glad to be here.
All right, what do you make of the latest round of war games being held in an area that's well known as a route for oil?
Well, I think Iran is trying to show that it's not going to react well to another UN Security Council sanctions resolution in an effort to affect the diplomacy. But in fact, it's a bluff on their part. I think they know this fourth sanctions resolution, even in its current draft form, is very watered down and will have an insignificant effect on Iran's continued progress toward nuclear weapons.
All right, now let me ask you as well. There's been a dust-up, a bit of conversation back and forth regarding missile defense and how ready we would be if Iran is indeed, by 2015, as some predict, capable of getting a missile to the U.S. You had some questions about just how ready we are. The Pentagon spokesman, Jeff Morrell, took on those allegations. Here was what he had to say yesterday on America Live.
It's going to be in debate whether or not Iran can develop an ICBM capable of hitting the United States by 2015. I think the latest report that went to Congress suggested that they would need some significant help to get there by that date. But regardless, even if they were to have that capability today, we have a missile defense system in place right now that can protect us against rogue threats emanating from countries like Iran and North Korea.
Ambassador, what do we have? What don't we have?
Well, we don't have an adequate missile defense, and this administration has made it weaker. You know, it's an interesting debate. In December of 2006, President Bush's Secretary of Defense recommended missile defense sites in Poland and the Czech Republic precisely to protect against an Iranian ICBM attack on the United States. Then last year, President Obama's Secretary of Defense recommended It's a curious historical coincidence, but both of those secretaries were named Robert Gates. The first Robert Gates had it right. Intelligence shifts back and forth. The latest intelligence shows why it was a mistake to cancel those bases. But here's something that's not based on intelligence: the shape of the world. That's why it was originally correct and remains correct today to have missile defense assets in Eastern Europe.
All right, so to the bigger picture of how we're dealing with Iran, are we making any progress as we talk about yet another round of sanctions?
No, and you know, I think we've gotten to the point where this continued discussion of sanctions is not just counterproductive, it's objectively benefiting Iran. There is no chance that the Security Council sanctions will slow down Iran's progress towards nuclear weapons, but it gives the illusion, the comforting feeling that the world is doing something about it. That's badly mistaken. Iran is on a course toward nuclear weapons, and only outside military intervention, which isn't going to come from the Obama administration, is going to stop them. I think we need to face up to the reality and to the hard decision that lies before Israel, as it has to decide whether it will use force to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Those are the two alternatives. Neither one is attractive, but arguing that sanctions are going to make a difference is just a distraction from reality.
Ambassador, I did want to ask you about Israel. I mean, they're in a very tenuous situation, much closer physically, geographically to this situation than we are here in the U.S. Their interests are clearly being threatened by the man who's now in charge. You know, do they act without us, without other international help, on their own?
Well, they have done that before. I think they're capable of doing it with respect to Iran's nuclear weapons program. And if they were to attack the program and destroy it, or at least set it back, they'd be acting in the U.S. national security interest and in the national security interest of many of the Arab states in the region as well.
I mean, clearly the U.S.-Israeli relationship has been strained. It's been under tension in the last few months. Are we communicating in any way with them, any kind of support for move ahead? I mean, how, you know, is it possible we'd be doing that behind the scenes, although publicly we may not be saying we're with you on this, or are they on their own if they decide to move ahead?
Now, I think one of the principal causes of the tension between Israel and the Obama White House is exactly the question of how to deal with Iran. I really don't think it has to do with 1,600 housing units in Jerusalem. It has to do with the critical issue of Iran. And I think the Obama administration is putting enormous pressure on the government of Israel not to take military action, including implicitly saying that we won't resupply Israel if it does make such an attack and suffers losses of planes and ordnance and sophisticated weapon systems. So I think this is something that really is going to continue until Israel decides one way or the other what it's going to do about that Iranian nuclear weapons program.
All right, and as we continue with diplomatic efforts, I mean, do we know anything about how the U.S. is doing in trying to marshal resources from Russia or from China or both of them to get them on board if we decide to go ahead with another round of sanctions?
Well, you know, Vice President Biden predicted yesterday we'd have this fourth sanctions resolution perhaps by the end of next week, which sounds to me very reasonable since they've been working on it for 7 months. I think behind the scenes, China and Russia are working to water down the sanctions resolution. I think at best the fourth one will be a marginal increment over the first three. So there's not much that anybody's going to be required to do, and in any event, its real impact on Iran trying to move it away from pursuing nuclear weapons will be insignificant, in my view.
All right, Ambassador, thanks for sharing your input and your opinions with us.